Right, hey guys, how we doing? Back another video from Totally Not Mark, and we are checking out his first part of the review of Stardust Crusaders. Now, Stardust Crusaders is noticeably longer than part 1 and part 2, hence why whenever anyone discusses this show, they tend to do the first part and then the second part as separate discussions, which is fair enough, because the first part is, we gotta go find Egypt, and then the second part is, we gotta go find Dio. And part 3 is my favourite part. I agree with what you said in this last one, where Jotaro is not the most interesting of the 3 JoJo's that we've met so far, but we do have Joseph? Is it Joseph that joins them, babe?
I'm not listening. Sorry.
Well, anyway, I think it's Joseph, because Jonathan's the first one, isn't he? So, we got Joseph Joestar join in with the gang, older, which is still cool because you still have that familiarity of the previous part carrying over. And then we have a change shift from the whole building up to using the hamon techniques to, we now got these magical things called stands that are like made up of part of our souls, and they're connected to us and they fight, and that it's like, what? And a whole new like system of fights is brought in with this. And Dio's back, and he's so freaking badass in this. And I love part 3. Dio isn't my favourite villain. We'll wait until further reviews. Hopefully, Totally Not Mark will touch on. But part 3 is my favourite. I love the whole journey aspect of it all. So, let's check out Totally Not Mark's review of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, part 3.
This video is brought to you by Patreon. Thank you for your incredible support. Stardust Crusaders is a totally different experience than I was expecting.
Yep.
Araki's all like, I'm glad you liked the last 2 arcs because here's something completely different. And to be honest, I found this to be viciously interesting.
This birthed so many memes.
For a mangaka to not only throw out the magic system he's
there you go. There's the hamon into the boom.
But to also completely change the format with which he structures his stories is not only whiplash-inducingly unconventional, but as I've learned by talking to friends about part 3, is also pretty controversial. This is a polarizing arc to say the least, and one that I'm grateful has given me an opportunity to explore from a narrative point of view why that might be. But most importantly, I can't wait to give you all my opinion on what is the first JoJo part I'm going into largely blind. This was the point
yeah, because he'd already seen part 1 and 2.
And let me tell
you,
I did not stop reading the manga. In fact, this was the arc that convinced me that Araki is not only exceptionally brave, but incredibly clever.
Yeah, he got big brain energy.
Not have ever noticed. So, get your stand ready, put on your best hat hair, and let's go on a long, sprawling adventure because I'm Totally Not Mark, and this is my review on the arc that changed everything we knew about JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. This is the controversial, the stylish, and the inspirational Stardust
Crusaders. I went doing that last note.
Okay, so
I love this.
Was 44 chapters long. Battle Tendency was 69.
Right. Nice. There you go.
Well, it's a bit longer, and by a bit longer, I mean it's 152 chapters.
That's more than twice as long as this.
This is a story
Damn.
that is more than twice as long as Battle Tendency,
just...
and more than 3 times as long. And that's not a bad thing. However, what it does mean is that it's going to be too long to cover in just one video.
Yeah, so obviously
week, I'll be reviewing the first half,
and then we do the second one. Yeah.
Because I'm a professional, in preparation for this video, I marinated myself in every piece of pop culture that defined the year that this arc was released, 1989, which included but was not limited to the first season of The Simpsons, Lethal Weapon 2, and who could forget the iconic and most aggressively 1989 experience to be released perhaps ever. I am of course speaking of the pinnacle of entertainment and generation-defining television program, Saved by the Bell.
Yeah, what a show! Which has come back.
Proved to be invaluable. Stardust Crusaders, released in 1989 but set in 1987 Japan, follows the adventures of one Kujo Jotaro as he learns of his new abilities thanks to the help of his grandpa and friend Abdul. Soon after this, it's revealed that Dio has returned, and with this, certain powers have surfaced within the Joestar family.
They have.
Jotaro and his grandpa being strong enough to control them, Jotaro's mother Holly is not.
Holly is not as strong because she's a woman.
Motivation for Jotaro and his merry band of friends to travel across the world to stop Dio in Egypt, making this story, particularly in the first half, a long road trip type story spanning many different locations.
Which is so cool. I love the travel.
November 18th, 1989 Saved by the Bell episode, wherein Zack wants to go on a field trip only for it to get cancelled later.
No.
And, funnily enough, while Stardust Crusaders' story is long, it's not necessarily because there's a lot of story. In fact, it's remarkably barren in that department. And boy, do I have a lot to discuss about the characters, the plot, and the structure of this particular section. I've done a lot of research for this arc, which turned out to be, honestly, unlike anything I've come across before. So, let's start at the beginning where I think this story's greatest strengths lie, before we dive into its controversial material later. The setup. In the beginning of this video, I mentioned that I hadn't seen the vast majority of Stardust Crusaders, and that's true, but I did see the beginning of the arc, and if there's one thing that Araki does narratively really well, it's introducing new characters.
Yeah, we get a good setup for them, we get to know who they are, what to feel,
Jonathan and Joseph within Phantom Blood and Battle Tendency, he manages to, in one scene, introduce us, endear us to, and get us familiar with the protagonist of this particular section, Kujo Jotaro, a 195cm tall, stoic, tough guy that is far more reserved than any other JoJo that's come before him.
Yeah, he's very chill.
This stands in direct contrast to Joseph Joestar, who is also in this arc. Completely distinct to any other JoJo that came before him, Jotaro boasts a much deeper and more reserved demeanor at almost all times. Pictured as a young boy in the opening pages, as we turn to the second, we are greeted by our new protagonist in a jail cell. Apart from the situation being immediately
more of
interesting,
a
the way Araki
introduction in the manga
to build
now.
up to the rest of the story is honestly brilliant. Abrasive and unkind from the outset, this Jotaro character is clearly nothing like anything we've seen before in the series, sporting, honestly, my favorite design out of any JoJo I've seen so far.
Cool.
Although, from my own observations online, this JoJo is not without his detractors, but for me on this outing, I grew to appreciate his unique brand of engagement with the story and even grew to love it in some parts. His no-nonsense, straightforward and abrasive persona really makes certain lines of dialogue hit wonderfully well. For instance, in the opening chapters, JoJo is in this jail cell not because the police want him there. In fact, it's the opposite.
He wants to be there
because he believes that he's haunted by a spirit.
Yeah, there's ghosts and he can't control it.
Not wanting to hurt anyone, he places himself there by his own volition. And while he's unkind and disconnected from any meaningful relationship he supposedly has in the outside world, including his own mother, introduced also to us within this scene are two very important characters both in this tale and Jotaro's life. The returning Joseph Joestar and Jotaro's mother, Holly. I found it to be
Astor's pretty important as well.
I was so fond of the prior arc surface and play a large role in this one too. Albeit he most definitely doesn't have the same sway over the series like he used to.
No, of course, he's not the main character.
In the magic system, but I'll get to that in a moment. Once again, this scene does a fantastic job in establishing Jotaro's mother and re-establishing Joseph Joestar as they try to engage with and coax out of hiding the increasingly adamant Jotaro before he eventually battles with Magician's Red, the power of Muhammad Abdul and friend of Joseph Joestar.
So freaking sick.
Now, something that might come as a surprise to anyone that hasn't watched or read this section
I love the VTuber being used in the corner.
Actually takes place in the first 12 chapters or so, and then something happens that I will absolutely be talking about in a moment. Because that aspect of the story is seen quite negatively among the fandom, and I've actually got something I think I can add to the conversation.
Okay.
But to cut a long story short, Dio is back, a new power system comes to the forefront of this arc, and because this new power requires a strong will to wield, when Jotaro's mother, Holly, gains the new ability thanks to her Joestar bloodline lineage and can't control it, Jotaro immediately jumps into action and seeks out Dio to free
her from the curse.
While on the surface that action doesn't sound like much or anything that would be noteworthy, coming from Jotaro, it absolutely is.
Yeah, because he's just
spent in jail to protect others from himself, to his time spent at school defending others from a possessed Kakyoin that joins the party later, Jotaro exudes all the emotion of a plank of wood, and and then for him to have that big urge, like, right, we're gonna go there, save Armon, despising him. However, this time around with the manga, I felt that because of that stoicism, the brief moments where the cracks start to show in his persona actually make a big impression on the reader.
Because he's trying to not show people that he actually feels things.
A number of times during the first 10 chapters, he openly and loudly dismisses his mother.
Yeah, he swears at her.
Delinquent he's portrayed to be. However, when he notices that she looks pale, and when she doesn't show up to kiss him, he wonders where she's gone to. While these examples are in the anime, there are others that aren't quite as overt. These are small moments in isolation, but they paint a bigger picture of a character who is virtuous and kind behind that masquerade. And it is by far my favourite aspect of his character. However, for most people, their favorite aspect of the story is not Jotaro. While many might love him or think he's awesome, because, okay, he is, I'd be willing to wager that this arc is as iconic as it is because of one specific element I've neglected to talk about thus far.
Stance.
This is largely why this is my favorite stand of all the JoJo arcs thus far, and not only does this act
Stand battles look so visually so beautiful.
Introductions to much of the cast, establishes relationships, and impresses upon us one very new addition to the series, the iconic JoJo's Bizarre Adventure Stand Magic System.
It's
Stands
sick.
as a system of power and battle are much more easily diversifiable.
It's very confusing in part 3 though if you try and make sense of it, because it's just come up with the idea for this.
At this point, acting effectively as manifestations of one's own personal willpower, they come in all different shapes and sizes.
We most certainly do.
Stand. Jotaro Stand comes to be known as Star Platinum, and one
Star
of the most simple of
Platinum.
the stands we see in this series, in that he is super fast and punches really hard, his appearances are made to look all the more impressive because his intense and fast movements stand in direct contrast with Jotaro's reserved and stoic persona.
Yeah.
Once again, Jotaro's personality serves to enhance more elements
I like that.
of his
It
story.
expresses how he actually is. Well, yeah, I imagine. I could keep inventing new characters forever like this. Well, yeah, I suppose you could, yeah. I'm coming up with loads of ideas for this. Yeah, makes sense, makes sense. You most certainly did. Jeez.
And this story is full of stands. Hamon is old news and stands are here to stay.
Yeah, not
Once
quite.
the goal of traveling to Egypt to do battle with Dio and to stop his evil ways comes to the forefront of our heroes' minds, pretty much every other character we meet along the way has a stand, and you best believe they more often than not are sent by Dio to stop the team of Jotaro,
Yeah.
Joseph, Kakyoin, Abdul, and Panaref from reaching Egypt. This is a story 3 generations in the making. Dio, now wielding the body of Joseph's grandfather, Jonathan,
Which
after
is
he
so
sacrificed
weird.
himself for the betterment of his family
Yeah.
and mankind, is now the body puppet of Dio, who is, in the manga, depicted in shadow for multiple volumes before he's eventually revealed properly. It's a great premise for a
It's
story.
cool
and
because you're like, what's actually going on with this guy?
Now,
He's
some of
so
you out there who might be
mysterious
new
and
to this series
sexy.
might be asking, okay,
I mean,
stands are cool and all, but what about Hammond? Why do I see a distinct
muscle
lack of
bound.
Hammond?
I mean-
And since Zach Morris can freeze time, does he have a stand too? All perfectly valid
Oh
questions.
god, Saved by the
While I
Bell
can't
references.
speak with absolute certainty regarding Zach Morris's standing in the JoJo continuity, when it comes to the disappearance of Hammond, I think it's an understandable question for fans of the series to ask. What gives Where's My Hammond? Because Joseph and Jonathan
But
spent
it
massive
does
sections
come
of their
back.
respective stories learning these fundamental elements of the system in order to compete against the evil that they came up against. And in Stardust Crusaders, Hamon is barely ever mentioned.
Oh, but it's still there. You've just pointed out that it's there.
Hamon the wrong way. However, now after reading up to this point in the series and after reading Araki's book, I think that's with good reason. You see, JoJo's Bizarre Adventure is structured somewhat unconventionally compared with other long-running shonen in that its main character consistently changes from story arc to story arc. This does wonders for the series in keeping it feeling distinct from other popular series within the issue of Weekly Shonen Jump, but it regrettably has, I believe, an irritating side effect, specifically when it came to implementing the Hamon power system. There are obvious benefits in switching from Hamon to stand powers. When Araki, as a writer, adopted stands, they granted him the flexibility to give any person any ability, which automatically injects tons of opportunity.
Yeah, you're not
for
limited
creative
to what they can do.
However, I don't believe this to be the only positive that influenced that decision to shift gears entirely. I mean, let's not forget, JoJo switching from Hamon to stands would be like if Dragon Ball switched from Ki to Pokemon battles. Vegeta! Block! Pokemon!
I'm not a Pokemon. I'm Chelsea.
Chelsea.
So, why the need to change things so completely and fundamentally? And why stop using Hamon altogether? Well, as I said, JoJo's Bizarre Adventure's structure was unlike many long-running shonen at the time. Teaching Hamon to Jonathan was great as it gave us, the audience, a chance to better understand the
Yeah, but there were so many
system,
other things out of the
and
time
it
that were
was
doing the
great getting to see
same
that
thing.
progression for the main character. However, when it came time for Joseph to become the protagonist, Araki was then faced with an interesting problem. How does he write Joseph Joestar to learn Hamon without it being boring? And the conclusion he came to was that he never taught Joseph Hamon, he just knew it by instinct.
He already
and
had
this
it.
was by design. And interestingly, Araki draws attention to this aspect of storytelling in his book, Manga in Theory and Practice. He talks about avoiding the temptation to go negative with your characters and to always be progressing in an ever-rising direction. Under the rule of rises and falls, you are allowed to start in a negative place and have the movement rise from there.
Right.
When it comes to that ever-rising direction, can't make any compromises. Interestingly, Hamon presented Araki with a very unique problem. series where every single time he starts a new arc, he has to teach the protagonist
how to use it. Right, okay, yeah.
Over and over without resetting to a point with each arc. The answer? He couldn't. Joseph started from a place far more advanced than Jonathan did, and really that was the last time he could, in theory, up the ante on that. And the solution he came up with to remedy this dilemma was stands.
Yeah.
With stands, he can introduce new characters easily and keep things interesting without retreading old ground.
Yeah, you don't have to keep being like, we need to learn this, because every stand is different.
From a writing standpoint, this, while initially jarring to fans of Hamon, the Hamon power system simply couldn't work long-term with its structure, and thus an elegant solution was implemented with stands. Personally, I really enjoyed the implementation of stands in the story. They add an immense amount of variety to it, and on top of that, lend opportunities for a mangaka like Araki to get as creative as possible. I mean, this one was a boat and its wielder was an orangutan.
Yeah. Everything. At the mother.
Don't do that again.
Hehe.
Okay. Alright, so there's no avoiding the topic that Stardust Crusaders is really long on top of the fact that they already fundamentally changed the formula of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. Last week, I released a poll on my Twitter asking JoJo fans in my audience if they liked Stardust Crusaders. The results, while not being overwhelmingly negative, did have a sizable portion of over 1 in 5 specifically stating that they did not like it. However, what was most interesting were the comments within the comments section. Comment after comment filled that section, citing that the arc dragged on too long, and that they didn't like the episodic standalone nature of its telling,
I loved it.
to some people overly boring at times. Yet, strangely, this is the arc that supposedly launched JoJo's Bizarre Adventure into the mainstream. This is the one people point to as the part when the series really starts to get good. In other words, a vocal minority disliked it somewhat or hated the arc, while others loved it. And that dichotomy in opinion honestly fascinated me. So much so it led me down a rabbit hole, the likes of which brought to my attention a newfound respect for Araki as a writer.
So part 4 and onwards. Part 3 was a story that had the shape of a role-playing game. It's like a board game where you go here and there. There's a book called Around the World in 80 Days. Yes, there is. It's a story I made with that as an influence. Oh, that's interesting.
In Araki's book, Manga in Theory and Practice, he mentions that around the time Battle Tendency was reaching its conclusion, the series was struggling in reader surveys. Now, okay, I can already see a few of you glazing over from here, so you might be wondering, what are these reader surveys? Well, in the case of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, because it was released in Weekly Shonen Jump, when Araki submitted new chapters of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure to be published, it did so alongside numerous other mangakas submitting their
and then like the viewers can submit what they're liking, what their favourite characters are, and stuff like that every week.
That needed to stand out. And none were more popular than Akira Toriyama's Dragon Ball at the time.
Of course.
However, because they were filled with so many different stories, they couldn't rely on Weekly Shonen Jump sales figures, and so instead supplied readers surveys at the end of each issue, asking them what their favorite running stories were. Series that did not perform well in these surveys consistently ran the risk of being cut from
just being
publication.
dropped,
And the more
which is
I read
mad.
about this, it became increasingly more interesting to me that Araki decided to go against every suggestion he received from the higher-ups
That's
and crafted a
class.
story like Stardust Crusaders, which is, as I mentioned above, unlike anything else that came before it in the series. But not just because of stands, because of how it was structured too. What's with Stardust Crusaders' bizarre episodic pacing? Once the goal is established and the motivation is made clear in venturing to Egypt to stop Dio and to save Jotaro's mother Holly, the story suddenly changes the format it's implemented since the very beginning of the series, changing from a serialized story to an episodic or Monster of the Week format. For those of you that don't know, serialized stories
But people
are
like
Dragon
action.
Ball, One
The
Piece,
stand
or Attack
fights
on
are
Titan,
different
where there's a clear
every
progression.
time.
Each chapter informs and furthers a story in obvious ways that typically don't repeat. Episodic storytelling, on the other hand, is closer to shows like Power Rangers. Every week there's a new monster to defeat, and thus a pattern appears. They fight as Rangers before eventually being overpowered, and they hop into their Zords, and boom, they win. This is a formula that gets reiterated time and time again until the story is ready to proceed, and some people found that irritating, specifically nowadays. Now, if you recall at the beginning of this video, I put up a poll on my Twitter asking the fans of JoJo if they liked Stardust Crusaders. Now, the vast majority said yes. However, what I haven't mentioned yet was that I put up a second poll also. This one asked, do you like Stardust Crusaders Monster of the Week
interesting.
format? And the results were very different.
Oh, that's
Very
nearly a
much so.
50-50
In
split.
other words, there's
Jeez.
not much much story within this part of Stardust Crusaders, and this bothered a significant chunk of the fan base. Once the setup is established and the characters go on their merry way, Jotaro and the crew might as well be walking through Mount Moon, encountering Zubat after Zubat, because the number of random encounters they get on their way to Egypt is quite relentless. Additionally, that's
but I love it. I love how random it is.
I've only just started talking about the story, because in this section of it, there's really very little meat to discuss beyond the different stand users they encounter time and time again as they get closer to their goal of Egypt. And the reason behind this seemingly sudden and insane narrative decision to change the format of the story turned out to be one of the single most interesting discoveries I made regarding JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, and maybe even any review I've ever done. In response to poor reader surveys during Battle Tendency, Araki's response was Stardust Crusaders, an episodic, non-narratively driven road trip across the globe to Egypt. At the time, as I said, within the publication Weekly Shonen Jump, Dragon Ball was extremely popular among readers. And at the time, Dragon Ball had just finished a series of tournament arcs, and
back when Yamcha was a threat,
jeez. Shonen Jump would suggest tournaments be written into any of the stories that were struggling. And in his book, Araki speaks on this. During the height of the popularity of the tournament manga,
that's interesting. So instead of doing a tournament,
the excitement, but I couldn't help but wonder from a creator's point of view what the mangaka would do after the top of the tournaments. At the time, JoJo was struggling in the reader surveys, and people even suggested that I add a tournament format to help.
So instead of actually making it a tournament itself,
to go for the safe,
just have the fight by fight episodically,
with
it not being a tournament. That's it.
The stand powers in a much more easy to control environment. He instead effectively does the opposite, not only ignoring all the advice he was given, but
which is class. Go ahead, lad. Go ahead.
Effectively changing a lot of what made JoJo, well, JoJo for the existing reader base. And there are plenty of cons to this. Typically speaking, for long-running shonen, serialization works much more effectively at telling engaging character-driven stories, with each chapter enjoying the opportunity for cliffhangers to help sustain its reader base. And at this point, fans of the series might actually start to notice that during this section, there aren't that many cliffhangers, and even if you look at shows that use episodic format to their benefit, like early Simpsons or Rick and Morty, these shows would turn the absurdity up to 11 and perform a host of different crazy stories all the time to help keep an audience engaged. However, with Stardust Crusaders, it very much follows the exact same format over and over again. Show up in an area, the team notices that something isn't quite right. It's the work of an enemy stand user. They then fight that user, and that user eventually falls. And they repeat this ad nauseum with slight variations here and there. It seems as though there's no benefit, but there actually is. With the format of episodic Monster of the Week storytelling, the story suddenly becomes incredibly accessible. The way the format often works is that it lends well to establishing existing main characters for the sake of a new viewer or reader time and time again with each chapter, which is largely why the side characters in this story feel more engaging. They get much more screen time, and as a result, the opportunity to build themselves up. And suddenly, because of this easy accessibility, Stardust Crusaders abruptly didn't need its reader base to catch up with the near 100 chapters of material that already existed. Shame. And instead,
don't skip part 1 and 2.
To understand journey at any point and enjoy the standalone encounters that popped up time and time again, and in that time, get to know all the characters.
Yeah, because it's never the same person fighting.
In other words, Araki ignored the advice of professionals that thought they knew better, and instead
which is sick. I love that.
He built in a ridiculously competitive industry on his own understanding of how story works, while also introducing and establishing a brand new power system in stands that he wasn't fully to grips with yet. That is one of the bravest things I've ever heard a manga
that
do.
is sick.
So often in pop culture and media do visionaries take the safe route and copy what's popular. I'm sure you've all noticed it when everything game-related wanted to mimic Fortnite's success in implementing a Battle Royale feature. You saw it when DC wanted to fast-track its franchise.
Yeah, they just went, wow, we're doing Avengers.
And you saw it when Dragon Ball's success informed the countless tournament arcs of its time. But what isn't spoken about nearly enough are the visionaries, the true visionaries, that when faced with certain doom, grit their teeth, dig their heels in, and declare that they understand how their medium works and that they genuinely believe in their own ideas.
They believe in their work and they're not going to change it because of what someone else said. That's sick.
Writers and illustrators, you don't get stories that try to copy something else to gain popularity. You instead get an iconic franchise that spans generations. You don't need to be inspired. Instead, you're the one making something that inspires.
Inspiring.
And so, while I haven't spoken too much about the strange and bombastic journey that Jotaro and his friends underwent on their way to Egypt. I really don't think the important aspects of it are the details of this particular journey, but the philosophy behind its creation. Stardust Crusaders, while I didn't love its first half's format, through my research it has become a story that I respect more than possibly any other I've ever read in my life.
That's cool. I like that.
It deserves to be known as the iconic arc it's become. Thanks for watching, guys. I know I didn't cover a lot of the meat and potatoes regarding the stand battles this week, particularly in this section. But I promise next week when I cover the second half and climax of this long journey, I'll also go back over some of these stand battles in more detail, and I'll tell you all my favorites. Because if there's anything the ending of Stardust Crusaders taught me, it's when I wake up in the morning.
Saved by the Bell theme tune. Jesus. So random. It's alright because I'm saved by the bell. As if I remember the theme tune. I'm so old. But anyway, that was good. That was a really good look at the Stardust Crusaders. Like, he didn't really go into like episode, but it's like the actual conception of the show and what makes it stand out. I do like that like he was told not to do what he did and it just worked, which is class. And the second half of part 3 is better than the first half when they get to Egypt, and the stand battles are a little bit more intense, and then the build up to Dio. And one of my favourite stand fights, I think, because it stands out more, is when the character Iggy is introduced and then Iggy just doesn't seem to give a crap about anyone. And he's a dog. And you get a stand battle between a dog and a bird. And it's like... And that's probably one of the most intense stand fights within part 3, in my personal opinion. We'll see what Mark has to say about that, if he doesn't mention that fight. But anyway, thank you guys very much for watching. What do you guys think of that? What do you guys think of this? Click like, subscribe if you haven't already. Leave comments down below. Let me know what I should watch and discuss in future videos. And I'll see you guys. It's all you guys next time. Bye. Bam.